Welcome to History in the Shadow. I am your host, Shahu. Let us start the main story. Before we go into the human stories, you need to understand what London actually looked and smelled like in 1888, because Victorian London was not the romantic gaslit city of Sherlock Holmes novels. It was something altogether different. Something that assaulted every single sense the moment you stepped outside your door. Take a breath right now. Breathe in through your nose. Whatever you just smelled, whatever was in that air, that experience simply would not have existed in Victorian London. The air in 1888 was not air as we understand the word. It was a yellow-brown fog. A permanent choking chemical soup made from the coal smoke pouring from 300,000 chimneys. Every house, every factory, every bakery, every brewery burning coal around the clock, mixed with the smell of horse manure on every street, open sewers running between the houses, and the output of slaughterhouses and tanneries operating in the middle of residential neighborhoods with no regulation whatsoever. There were over 300,000 horses in London in the 1880s. Each horse produced between 15 and 30 pounds of manure every single day. Do the mathematics. That is over 4.5 million pounds of horse dung hitting London streets every 24 hours. Children were hired specifically to scoop it up. They were called crossing sweepers. They could never keep up. The manure mixed with rain and formed a thick brown paste that covered everything. The streets, the pavements, the bottom of every door, the hem of every skirt. Londoners wore black clothing not as a fashion choice. They wore black because black hid the filth. The entire city dressed in the color of its own dirt. London in 1888 had 4 million people. It was the largest city the world had ever seen, and it had been built for 1 million, 3 times its intended population, crammed into streets and buildings that were never designed to hold them. The East End, where workers lived, where the factories and the doss houses and the gin palaces were, was so overcrowded that families of 8 routinely shared a single room. Streets were so narrow that neighbors in facing buildings could reach out their windows and shake hands across the gap. And then there was the river. The Thames, the heart of London, the artery of the empire, was an open sewer. Raw human waste from 4 million people flowed directly into, untreated, unfiltered, undiluted. In the summer of 1858, known to history as the Great Stink, the smell coming off the Thames was so overpowering that Parliament itself could not function. Members of the House of Commons soaked curtains in chloride of lime and hung them over the windows to block out the odor. It did not work. They seriously considered moving the entire government out of London. The Thames was not a river. It was a 4 million person toilet in the middle of the world's most powerful city. And yet people kept coming. From the English countryside, from Ireland, from Eastern Europe. They all came to London because London had one thing they needed: work. Now let me tell you about the match girls. Pay close attention, because what happened to these women is one of the strangest and most horrifying facts in all of British history. At the Bryant and May factory in Bow, East London, young women and girls, some as young as 13, dipped thin wooden sticks into white phosphorus to make matches, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, for less than 5 shillings. The phosphorus entered their bodies through their skin, through their lungs, through the food they ate at their workstations, because they were not allowed to leave to eat. So they ate with phosphorus still on their fingers, breathing phosphorus vapor with every breath. The first symptom was a toothache. Then the gum began to swell. Then the jawbone itself started to rot. The condition was called phossy jaw, phosphorus jaw. And here's the detail that no one forgets once they hear it. The jawbone glowed in the dark. The phosphorus absorbed into the bone caused it to emit a faint greenish light clearly visible in the darkened room. Women with phossy jaw could see their own face glowing when they looked in a mirror at night. A soft, eerie, greenish glow from their own rotting bone. And then the bone died. And then it fell away. The factory fined workers for talking, fined for having dirty feet, fined for dropping matches, fined for going to the toilet without permission. The fines could take half their weekly wage, sometimes more. In 1888, that was considered a good job. Below the factory workers were occupations so strange they sound invented. The pure finders walked the streets of London all day, every day, collecting dog excrement with their bare hands. They sold it to leather tanneries who used it to soften animal hides. Between 200–300 people in London made their entire living this way, not occasionally, every day. For their whole working lives, the Toshers went underground. They crawled through London's sewer system, a network of brick tunnels beneath the entire city, carrying the waste of 4 million people in total darkness, wading waist deep through human waste, feeling through the filth with their hands for coins and pieces of metal. They worked by candlelight, a single candle strapped to their chest, in tunnels so old and fragile that the bricks could be scooped out with a spoon. The air was thick with methane and hydrogen sulfide, gases that could kill a man in minutes. If the candle went out, they navigated by touch alone, in total darkness through human waste, underground. One Tosher told a journalist about a man found in the sewers, his body eaten down to his bones by rats. And below the Toshers, at the absolute bottom of London's working economy, were the mudlarks, children, mostly boys, some girls as young as 6 years old. They waded barefoot into the freezing Thames mud at low tide, searching through the filth for anything they could sell, coal that had fallen from barges, pieces of rope, nails, animal bones. They cut their feet constantly on broken glass and rusted metal buried in the mud. They worked in winter without shoes. Some mudlarks were caught by the incoming tide. Some of them drowned. When the shift ended, the workers went home. But the word home needs an entirely new definition for 1888. A single room, 10 feet by 10 feet. A family of 6 inside it. No running water, no toilet. No heating except a handful of coal burned in a grate so small it barely warmed the hands held above it. One bed, shared by the parents and the youngest children. Older children slept on the floor. In the worst buildings, the floor was bare earth, damp, cold, literally so in many doss houses, the cheap lodging houses for the very poorest workers. Beds were rented in shifts, 3 shifts per day. You paid for 8 hours. When your 8 hours ended, someone else climbed into the same bed while the sheets were still warm from your body. 3 complete strangers shared the same bed every 24 hours. They never met each other. They never knew each other's names. For those who could not afford even a shared bed, 4 pennies for the night, there were the 4-penny coffins. Wooden boxes literally the size and shape of a coffin. 4 pennies for the night. You climbed in, pulled a tarpaulin over yourself, and slept in a row of identical boxes with 50 other people beside you, stacked in rows like a mortuary that charged rent. Below the coffins was the 2-penny hangover, the rope we described at the beginning. And below the rope, at the absolute bottom, was the penny sit-up. For a single penny, you could sit on a bench in a warm room until morning, but you were not permitted to sleep. Monitors walked the room throughout the night, waking anyone who closed their eyes. Sleep was not included in the price. You paid for warmth, not rest. 1 penny to sit in the warm and be prevented from sleeping all night. And here is a detail that connects this to one of the most famous criminal investigations in history. 3 of Jack the Ripper's victims, the women murdered on the streets of Whitechapel in 1888, lived in doss houses. On the nights they were killed, each of them had been walking the streets trying to earn the 4 pennies needed to pay for a bed. They were not looking for trouble. They were simply trying to earn enough money not to sleep in the cold. The price of not dying from exposure was 4 pennies. The price of failing to earn it was their lives. What did a Victorian worker in the East End eat in 1888? Bread was the staple food. Workers ate it 3 times a day. Sometimes it was the only thing they ate, but the bread sold in the East End was not food as we would understand the word today. Bakers routinely mixed chalk into the flour. Not occasionally, not as an accident. Routinely, deliberately, as standard practice. Chalk made the bread appear whiter. Alum was added to make the bread heavier, because heavier bread sold for more per loaf. Ground plaster, powdered bone. A worker eating bread 3 times a day was eating construction material 3 times a day. Milk was watered down, sometimes to half its original volume, then bulked back up with chalk powder or plaster of Paris to restore the white color. The water used to dilute it came from sources contaminated with cholera and typhoid. Meat available to the poorest workers came from animals that had died of disease, not animals that had been slaughtered. animals that had died from illness and been sold rather than discarded, washed in chemicals to disguise the smell. Now here is something you have almost certainly never heard. The word hangover, the one you use when you describe the morning after drinking too much, comes directly from the two-penny hangover. Workers who spent their last pennies on gin instead of a bed ended up leaning on the rope for the night. The miserable physical feeling the next morning became associated with the rope itself. Workers called it a hangover. The word entered common use. It spread across the English language, across the Atlantic. Today, people use this word every weekend without the faintest idea that it was coined by people who were too poor to lie down. Gin was cheaper than bread in the East End, and the gin palaces, the establishments that sold it, were the most beautiful buildings that most East End workers would ever enter in their lives. Bright gas lights reflecting off polished brass, mirrored walls, warm air, colored glass. They sold temporary beauty to people whose lives contained almost none. A factory girl with a jaw that glowed green in the dark from phosphorus poisoning could walk into a gin palace and for 1 penny exist in a room that did not want to hurt her. You cannot call that escapism without understanding what it was escapism from. Cholera was not a distant historical threat in Victorian London. It was a local, immediate personal danger that killed within hours. A worker could eat breakfast feeling completely well, feel the first stomach cramps by noon, and be dead before nightfall. Tuberculosis was everywhere. The White Plague, they called it. A bacterial infection of the lungs that thrived in exactly the conditions of the East End. Damp walls, overcrowding, poor nutrition, bodies weakened by labor and cold. But here is the thing that makes Victorian disease truly strange and truly tragic. Germ theory, the understanding that infectious diseases are caused by microscopic organisms, had only been accepted by mainstream medicine in the 1880s. Most workers in the East End had never heard the word bacteria. They did not know what made them sick. The prevailing belief, even among many practicing doctors, was that disease was caused by bad smells. The miasma theory. If something smelled bad, it was dangerous. If something smelled fine, it was safe. A family drawing water from a pump contaminated with cholera believed they were perfectly safe, because the water looked clear and smelled like nothing. They drank it confidently. They gave it to their children, and they got cholera. Meanwhile, the toshers, the men crawling through sewers waist deep in human waste, rarely caught cholera, because that filth was not entering their drinking water. The people who smelled the worst were, paradoxically, safer than the people who smelled nothing. Nobody in 1888 understood why, and the sewer workers reported something so bizarre that supervisors initially refused to believe them. The steam rising from sewers near breweries, where grain fermentation produced significant quantities of alcohol, contained enough alcohol vapor to make the workers drunk. Men emerged from the sewers intoxicated, stumbling, unable to walk straight. Not from drinking, from breathing. They called it being made innocent drunk by the sewers. The average life expectancy for a working man in the East End of London in 1888 was 31 years. Let that sit for a moment. 31. Not because adults routinely dropped dead at 31. The number was pulled down by something far more devastating. 1 in 4 babies born in the poorest parts of London did not survive to their 5th birthday. The parents buried their children and went back to work the next morning, because a day without wages was a day without food for the children who were still alive. Children in the East End of London in 1888 were not children in any sense we would recognize today. A child who could walk could work. A child who could work was expected to earn. Boys as young as 4 years old climbed chimneys. The flues of London's houses were sometimes only 9 inches wide. 9 inches. The width of a large book. Boys were sent up naked, because clothing would catch on the brickwork. They scraped the soot with their bare hands as they climbed, inch upward through passages so narrow that larger children got stuck. If a boy was too frightened to climb, and many of them were because they were 4 years old and the flue was dark, the chimney sweep would light a small fire beneath him. The choice was climb or burn. The boys who survived developed over time a specific cancer, caused by constant exposure to soot accumulating on their skin as they climb. It was the first occupational cancer ever identified in the history of medicine, and it was found in children. Some children caught rats for a living, not to kill them, to sell them alive to pub owners who ran rat-baiting pits, where crowds paid to watch dogs kill rats for entertainment. The rat catcher would grab rats with his bare hands. The rats bit constantly and deeply. The infections for fleas bites killed more rat catchers than any other hazard in the entire East End. And here is one detail about Victorian children that is not horrifying but deeply, profoundly strange. Because so many children died before their 5th birthday, many families never had a photograph taken of their child while alive. Photography was expensive. You did not spend money photographing a baby who might not survive the winter. But when a child died, some families would scrape together the money for a death photograph. The dead child was carefully dressed and posed as if sleeping. Sometimes a photographer would paint eyes onto the closed eyelids to make the child appear merely asleep rather than dead. These death photographs were often the only image a family ever had of their child, the only proof that this person had existed. Kept in lockets, displayed on mantelpieces, placed in family albums beside photographs of the living, the portrait taken after they stopped breathing. Education had been made compulsory in England in 1880. In the East End, it was almost entirely unenforced. The reason was simple and brutal. A child who could earn 4 pennies a day was worth more to a starving family than a child who could read. The choice between literacy and dinner was made every single morning across thousands of households. And dinner won every time. The wealthy Victorians knew about all of this. This is the detail that may be hardest to absorb. They knew. It was not hidden. It was not secret. The conditions of the East End were written about extensively in newspapers. Politicians debated it in Parliament. Charles Booth's monumental survey of London poverty, begun in 1886, mapped the economic conditions of every street in the city in extraordinary detail, and some wealthy Victorians responded by inventing a leisure activity called slumming. They would dress down, hire a guide, and take evening tours through the East End, visiting doss houses, gin palaces, and opium dens for entertainment, treating the worst poverty in Europe as a tourist attraction. The same people who could have materially changed the conditions chose instead to pay to watch them. In July of 1888, something happened that nobody in power expected. The match girls walked out, 1,400 of them, from the Bryant and May factory in Bow, East London, mostly teenagers, many already showing the early signs of phosphorus poisoning, all of them earning less than 5 shillings a week. The immediate cause was this. One of their co-workers had been dismissed for speaking to a journalist investigating factory conditions. The factory management then demanded that remaining workers sign a document declaring they were satisfied with their working conditions. The women refused. They walked out of the building. Without a union, without a strike fund, without legal protection, without a plan, without any reason to believe that walking out would achieve anything except getting them all dismissed and replaced. They had absolutely nothing. And nothing, it turned out, was the most dangerous weapon in London. When you have nothing, there is nothing left to take away. The strike lasted 3 weeks. The women marched through the streets. They spoke at public meetings. Factory girls who had never spoken in front of more than a handful of people, standing before crowds of hundreds, describing in plain language what phosphorus does to a human jawbone. They described the fines. They described the 14-hour days. They described the wages so small that a single unexpected expense could make the difference between a coffin bed and sleeping standing up on a rope. London's newspapers, which had published exactly 0 words about conditions inside a match factory before this moment, suddenly could not look away. The public felt something they had not previously been given the opportunity to feel. Genuine, specific, detailed outrage. Not abstract sympathy for the poor as a category, but specific anger about specific conditions in a specific factory with specific names. Bryant and May surrendered. They abolished the system of fines. They improved ventilation, and they formally recognized the union the striking women had formed, the Union of Women Matchworkers, which became the largest union of women and girls in the entire country. 1,400 teenage girls with rotting jawbones changed British labor law forever. They did it in 3 weeks, with nothing. The word tosser, a British insult used millions of times every day, is a corruption of tosher, the men who crawled through Victorian sewers. Over generations, tosher became tosser and lost its original meaning entirely. Every time someone calls another person a tosser, they are unknowingly referencing a Victorian sewer worker wading through human waste in total darkness, feeling through the filth for lost coin. The language remembers what the history books forgot. The minimum wage exists because of what happened when there was none. Health and safety regulations. The ones that prevent your employer from forcing you to work with toxic chemicals. The ones that require ventilation and safe machinery and regular breaks. Exist because girls' jawbones rotted green in match factories while the factory fined them for complaining. Labor unions. The organizations that fought for the 8-hour workday, that established the concept that workers have rights, exist because 1,400 women walked out of a building in East London in July 1888 and refused to walk back in. Every protection you have as a worker, every legal right, every safety standard, exists because someone, at some point, had none of it, and fought. The world these workers built with their broken hands and their glowing jawbones and their bare feet in the Thames mud is the world you live in now. They deserve to be seen, not as statistics in a textbook, not as background color in a period drama, as human beings, standing in the streets where they lived, doing what they had to do to survive one more day, the most unforgiving city on earth, fighting when they finally found a way to fight with the only weapon they had, the fact that they had nothing, and the knowledge that nothing could be taken from them.